Ramon Kubicek, in this interview series, we have seen your work circular. Here you juxtapose, it seems to me, the circular and the linear, so that there is a basal geometry. How would you respond to that?
I would not disagree with that, Professor Cornet. I looked at this in a way that what interested me was just simply the formal qualities that could come from line. If I just drew one line, and I then allowed it to almost follow its own will, so to speak. So I bent the lines here, and then I added some of the dots, and then I try to create a flow with some of these things. So I created a relationship between color and line and flow. This is what interested me, and with a lot of spacing in between. So despite some of the intense color, I wanted to make sure that everything in it could breathe.
In textual studies, we refer to the narrative. When I look at this work, ironically, Ramon Kubicek, I perceive it in Hegelian terms. That is to say, a thesis, an antithesis, and a synthesis in this mediating space. Does that ring true?
Yes, I never thought of it that way, Hegelian. But yes, in terms of there being a movement between, I guess, two poles, and the sense of some kind of wave energy, and then going back and forth and up and down, certainly. And there was that sense of maybe, if I use the word antithesis, I certainly don't need it as something that's static. Mm-hmm. It's constantly in movement, and I wanted to be able to create that. But I also wanted to create some images there that seemed static until when observed. For instance, this solid red line is broken up with a similar color, similar pigment, so that it defeats the idea of simply a static energy.
You're also a writer, Ramon Kubicek. Mm-hmm. When I look at this work, I can't help thinking that you're striving for equilibrium. Negative space, positive space, mediating space. And what comes to mind is Edward Albee's A Delicate Balance. Do you strive for that in this composition?
Always strive for a delicate balance. Again, the reference Edward Albee, I can't say that that came to mind, but certainly the idea of a delicate balance is something that I aspire to, so if that comes through, then I'm pleased.
Mm-hmm. And the striation, which seems unique in the interview series, these furrows, mm-hmm. these lines, these rows, and it's very serial when we're thinking yes. of music, serial compositions, for example, a Weber or Schoenberg. Yes. There's something quite serial about this.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting because I did see it in some way as writing down musical notation in visual terms. I wasn't going to talk about it, but then you had to mention it. So I'm glad that you were able to intuit that. There is that sense of searching for the right notation, so to speak, mm-hmm. that would communicate some of the things that interested me.
And speaking of notation, particularly here in these small dots and the striation, the lines, I can't help thinking there is underlying a semiotic approach to visual art in this composition. Signs, symbols, yes. and significance.
Right. Well, that's wonderful that you're able to look at that. I don't work intellectually, even though in my career as teaching at various places, I did teach elements of semiotics and looked at all of that theory. When I actually paint, I leave all theory behind. I go into the studio with what they say blank mind. So it works there possibly, but I make instant decisions, intuit, and I know when I'm doing something that I don't like, and so I change it. But it's not because the theory has been challenged. I'm not interested in that. So if theory is coming out, that you recognize that's something that's possibly been seated in my unconscious, because I'm certainly not working consciously that way.
You're also a writer, and write extremely well, I might add. In literary theory and literary critique, there is a touchstone work known as a fearful symmetry.
Yes.
Could this be the visual equivalent of a fearful symmetry?
I don't know. I'd have to think, is there some element of the tiger here? I don't, certainly that reference to Blake, and it's interesting because no matter how many times it shows you this is in some way also a touchstone of greatness, because no matter how many times I read Blake's The Tiger, which is, of course, as we know, the source of that phrase, fearful symmetry, it never gets boring. And I never get the sense that I've understood what the fearful symmetry is about. I'd only support that to the extent that if anything is too rigid, it doesn't work for me. So even if I'm making what looks like a straight line, I'll bend it, I'll wiggle it, and so forth, because absolute accuracy, rigidity, is fearful, is imprisoning. So that's the only way. Other than that, in that sense, symmetry can be fearful. And it's interesting because it's really saying perfection can be fearful.